Welcome to the Rebranding Christianity podcast. My name is Greg Holmes. For the last several weeks, my friend Cindy Park and I have been interviewing Jeff Jones and Mike Hogan, authors of the book that launched this podcast, Rebranding Christianity, When the World's Most Important Brand Loses Its Way. And this is actually the last podcast conversation about this book specifically. This is not the last podcast, Rebranding Christianity podcast. We'll talk about more about that at the end, but specifically about the book. This is the last one. Throughout this book, Jeff and Mike have made a compelling case that the perception issues that Christianity faces in America right now are our issues to solve. It's not someone else's problem or someone else's fault. We own the brand. But whenever, at least I, have a conversation with a Christian about this issue or about this book, a variation of the same question always gets asked, and it's this. Didn't Jesus himself say that we would be hated? Why should we care what people think of us?
This is an important question. We're going to spend the whole episode talking about it. Is rebranding about popularity and being liked? When Jesus said that we would be hated, what was he talking about? Hated by who? Hated for what reason? So Jeff, I want to start with you. Could you unpack the passage for us where Jesus talks about the fact that we would be hated?
Yeah, he told his disciples that, right? And so there's tension because we have all these passages in the New Testament that we've talked about in this series about relating in a way that's careful and attractive and draws people to Christ and is engaging and all of that. So what Jesus said doesn't cancel that out, but it does give attention, right? Because Jesus said, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belong to it, but you're no longer part of the world. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you. Do you remember what I told you? A slave is not greater than the master. Since they persecuted me, naturally, they will persecute you. So that's the tension, right? So both are true, that if we relate, that we're to relate to culture in a compelling, engaging, attractive way. And generally, often, that will prove to be true, but not always. And so I can't control that, right? So our job is really not to be liked. That's not our goal. Our goal is to simply represent the character and brand of Jesus in the heart of God accurately and well. And for most people in most situations, that will actually be a positive thing, but not everybody. Christianity is pretty subversive, and it upsets especially the powerful. If you look at who came against Jesus, it was not the least and the lost. It was the religious and the religious leaders, and because the way of Jesus didn't jibe very well with them. And so
we tend to have, at least within Christianity, we tend to have our own definition of what is the kind of sort of quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes here, of the world, and as culture moves away from Christian norms or those types of things, and we think, well, if those people who disregard the Bible, those people who are far outside, we're going to be hated by those people. But when you look at Jesus saying, if the world hates you, and remember the world hates me, and we looked at who hated Jesus, those people didn't hate Jesus. And I think that's a pretty important, we kind of gloss over that the people that we are expecting to be hated by actually liked Jesus. So Jesus does demonstrate Jesus' life demonstrates for us that when we live out the ethos of Jesus, who is it that's going to hate us? It's not going to be the people on the outside. I don't know if you have any comment.
Yeah, well, that's true with Jesus for sure.
Yeah, right.
And what you see in Rome as Christianity expands is it was more the power structure in Rome that hated Christianity because Christians wouldn't worship the emperor and so on. But Christians won over the populace because of their love, because of living out the brand, which eventually toppled the whole Roman Empire toward Jesus, toward Christianity. And I love so I can't control, my job is to live out the brand and allow God to work. My job is not to be liked. But I really appreciate what Peter said to the Roman Christians, because he talked about, be careful. We looked at some of those passages in the last episode. Be careful how we relate to non-believers in a way that's attractive, in a way that makes them ashamed they ever had anything bad to say about you, and so on. But it doesn't mean that it's always going to work out. You may still be hated. But what he tells the believers in Rome is, just make sure you're hated for the right reasons.
What are those reasons?
And well, here's what he says. He says, now, who will harm you if you're eager to do good? But even if you suffer for doing what is right, God will reward you for it. So don't worry or be afraid of their threats. So if we're persecuted because we're not doing good, if we're a jerk, if we're self-serving, if we're hypocritical, then basically what Peter's saying is that's on you. You deserve what you get. That should happen. So just make sure if you're suffering, you're not suffering because of that, because for a bad reason. But if you suffer for doing good, if you're actually the kind of person God's calling you to be, if you're representing the brand well, and you still get persecuted, you still get hated, well, you know what? You're going to be rewarded for that for all eternity. So don't worry about it. Just glory in it. You don't have to be mad. You have to be upset. Heaven's a long time. This life's a short time. You'll be rewarded for all eternity for the little bit of flack that you took for being a Christian. And so, see it as a good thing.
The rejection can actually be an opportunity to demonstrate the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that in the first century, right? I mean, that's what Jesus said, so we get upset and when we get treated unfairly and we got to stick up for our rights and we got to change, we can go that direction, which is not the brand. The brand is actually say, hey, these people that are hating me and persecuting me, you know what? They're not my enemy. Or even if they are, if they put themselves in the category of my enemy, well, what is my job to do? Well, it's to love them. It's to do good to them. It's to pray for them. So bingo, this is like a perfect opportunity to live out the brand. This is the best opportunity I've had all week. The way this person treated me because of my Christianity, to demonstrate the love of Jesus in a compelling way. And so I'm going to pray for them. I'm going to do good to them. I'm going to love them. I'm going to figure out a way to serve them. I'm not going to respond tit for tat. I'm not going to have revenge like the Bible says. I'm going to let God deal with all that. I'm just going to love this person. And the early Christians did that. I mean, and I don't think we appreciate how devastating persecution is. I mean, people in our Christians right now kind of have a persecution complex, which is really silly. I've spent months at a time with actual persecuted Christians, like people who are losing their lives, who are going to prison, who are losing their livelihoods, who are losing property. And I've spent, again, months at a time with these people. So what we're experiencing here is not that. Like we need to grow up a little bit. Like we're not, if we have a persecution complex, we need to kind of chill on that. But what I saw with them and what you see in church history is that, like the Roman Christians in the Roman Empire that were getting killed in the Colosseums, where they would sew animal skins on or sew people into carcasses, riding carcasses and turning lions loose, or covering people in tar and lighting them on fire alive to light these garden parties, and all this stuff that was happening. Well, the way Christians responded was exactly what Jesus said. Before they were lit on fire, they were praying for their persecutor. They were blessing them, encouraging them, saying good things to them. Like they were, and a populace looking on was like, who are these people and why are we doing this to them? Like they're the best people in the world. How could we possibly think there's something? And so it's a big part of what won people over to Christianity. And every time I'm mistreated, rather than thinking, oh no, this is terrible, if I'm really understanding what Jesus said, it's like, bingo, this is a great opportunity. I'm being mistreated. The way I respond is going to say everything about Jesus. So I'm going to respond with love and grace.
Mike, I want to hear from you about, so from a branding perspective, like sometimes, and you made the case in this podcast and through the case studies in the book, that when a brand is hated or when they completely, lose the trust of their customer and maybe hated for the wrong reasons, it's difficult but not impossible to regain and to restore trust. And you've already talked about the examples of Domino's Pizza, and we've kind of teased throughout this podcast the story of Tylenol. What happened to Tylenol in the 80s? And why is that such an important story that we could learn from?
Sure. Well, I guess I should begin. This happened in 1982, so a lot of people probably don't even know that story, right? But it's a really, really famous story. It's still actually taught in business school today as sort of like the gold standard of how a brand would respond to a crisis. So 1982, there was a week, it is suburban Chicago, and 7 people died. And very quickly they figured out that all 7 of them had taken Tylenol. Very quickly, they figured out that somebody had gone into a couple of grocery stores and taken some Tylenol off the shelf and put cyanide inside the tablet and put it back on the shelf, and people took it and they died. And so that's what happened. By the way, if you're under the age of 40 and you're thinking, how in the world could that possibly happen because everything's triple sealed? The answer is everything is triple sealed today because this happened, right? I mean, it literally changed the whole way in which things were done. So here you have this huge and highly profitable brand, and all of a sudden nobody trusts it. They're afraid to take it. They weren't just afraid of Tylenol, right? They were afraid of everything in the grocery store because, right, it could happen to anything. And what to me is remarkable about this story is the way that Tylenol responded. Now, Tylenol, it's the Johnson & Johnson company, so the way they responded. But and there's really 2 things, right? The first thing is what they didn't do, and the second thing is what they did do. And what's interesting is what they didn't do is what, most people and 100% of politicians would have done, which was deny it and blame somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because, they could have said, hey, look, we didn't do this, and everybody knew that they didn't poison their own product and so on. But what was interesting is they took up and they essentially said, no matter who did this, we're responsible for the brand, and we need to take care of the people. And so I think the not making excuses, not denying, not blaming on somebody else, even though clearly there were other people at fault, really set them apart. And then the second thing they did was they went very quickly and directly about, we'll leave no stone unturned, because what they recognized at the beginning was it wasn't a product problem, it was a trust problem, right? And it wasn't that they had broken trust, but somebody else had done something that broke that trust of, I know what this product is, I can take it, I know what it will do, and so on and so forth.
It wasn't their fault, but it was their problem.
Well said. Yeah. Exactly. They owned it. And I think, that's obviously, there's a lot of things today that we would say, is there media bias? Well, yes, there's all these other things out there, but we're still responsible for the brand. So what they did is, and by the way, this all happened in Chicago, so they could have said, it's not our fault, it's terrorists. They could have said, we'll recall the bottles in Chicago. They could have done a lot of things, but they didn't. They stopped making it. They recalled all the product in the whole country at a cost of over $100 million in 1982 dollars, right? And they even ran ads saying, don't take the product yet. And then they went off and they did the whole triple seal thing, completely changed it. And they basically said, we're going to create a system that even somebody else can't mess up. That's hence the triple seal. So, and then what happened at the end of the day was not only did their product recover and regain its, its brand regard and its market share and so on, but pretty much every other product in the grocery store had to follow suit. They set a new standard for what trust actually looks like. So I think to me, it's just a great example of a brand owner stepping up and saying, we didn't do it, but we own it, and we need to be about we need to not be about ourselves. We need to be about the people and restoring trust.
So as we're talking about in this topic of meant to be hated, a product that is designed to help people that is determined to actually kill people. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that. And everybody is just going to hate, in a quote unquote hate, push away this product, no way to do it, or no way that I'm going to participate with this brand. I don't trust it, like that type of thing. And everyone would have expected that there's no way that brand could survive that. And I would look at Christianity. I mean, I think that at least in emerging generations, there is a disdain for Christianity for reasons. It's well, that's not what Jesus was talking about when he says, if you live good, if you live according to what he has called us to do and people hate you, then that's, that's, what we're experiencing is, certainly different, but there is some similarities, that there has been a major hit to the Christian brand, and for things that, we don't want to be hated for. What can we learn from Tylenol that could actually be really applicable for Christian leaders and for churches, as we try to regain trust?
Yeah, I think you said it well. To me, the probably the most important thing is, the first thing Tylenol did is they didn't spend a lot of time trying to assign blame.
Yeah. Right.
They just jumped in, owned it, and did something. And I think we today, we spend a lot of time, even with the church, saying, okay, who's responsible for this? And the answer is there's a lot of reasons for what's going on. Instead, they ask the question, what can I do to make it better? Now, they were obviously in a position to recall all the product, change the way it was packaged, and so on. But I think one of the things that I'm continually amazed by, and we talked about this a little bit last time in the ambassador chapter, is the difference that a person or a few people can make, right? So none of us can change the way all Christians act or what all churches do, but we can be ourselves and we can join with other like-minded people. And I think you could look at it the other way and say, they never caught the person, by the way, but it was probably one person who caused this whole problem. And so, think about what one person can do or a small group of people can do to help the brand. And I think if we each take ownership, and do what we can, that's what ultimately a movement's all about.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up our conversations about the book, I want to ask both of you, what do you hope that Jesus followers are known for? I know that you want the church to be known for loving the way that Jesus loves, but is there something specific that you're like, I want Jesus followers to have this label?
Yeah, sure. So, I told this story about my daughter working at a restaurant, and she was a hostess at this restaurant, and she came home one day and she said, it's funny because on Sunday, the after-church crowd is known as sort of the most demanding people and the worst tippers, so that's clearly what we're not. And I think being known for being good tippers is as good as anything else. What strikes me about it is it's easy. Right.
Yeah.
And so I would say, we talk about living the brand. A lot about living the brand is hard, but this part's actually pretty easy. Leaving a nice tip, letting somebody in the traffic, being calm with a new worker who's trying to get it right, all these situations that we're all in. By the way, I should say, in the interest of full disclosure, my wife, Brenda, is much better at this than I am. So I just want to say that. Like if we're in a restaurant and there's police, she might go over and buy their coffee or their avocado toast or I didn't say donut.
I was waiting.
I said avocado toast. But, a few weeks ago, a friend and I were ordering lunch one day, and we were at this place where you order and then you sit down, and this lady in front of us had her food ready and her credit card was declined, and you could tell she was just tired and hungry and it was going to ruin her whole day. And so my friend and we just bought her lunch. I mean, it was like $8, okay? And she was dressed as a nurse, but so it was $8, but it made such a difference. And so for me, the broader point is if we just kind of keep our eyes open, there's like a million simple things that we can do every day that make a positive difference, and people notice when you don't think they notice. And there's just so many things we can do that are so easy.
I'll share mine, but Mike, I love your illustration and what you're saying, because a lot of what we're talking about in living the brand, being the most loving person individually or the most loving group collectively, wherever God's placed us, and doing what Jesus would do, loving like Jesus will, most of the time it's actually simple. It's not complicated. It's pretty simple when you think, well, yeah, what could I do it doesn't mean it's easy because it's sacrificial, right? I have to give up something. So it's not easy, but it is simple. And so I think just living with that commitment of, hey, I'm just always going to ask myself in any environment, in any situation, how can I be what would the most loving person in the world do right now? And that's what I'm going to do, because that's what it means to love like Jesus, so. And I guess I could say that as my answer. Yeah, I was thinking, though, when you said that, Jesus said, let your light shine before others, that they see your good works and glorify our Father in heaven. And he's talking about people who don't know God, glorifying God. So wouldn't it be cool if we lived in culture, both collectively as a group and individually, wherever God has placed us, in a way where people who don't even know God are glorifying God and thanking God, even though they don't know him, and curious about God because of the way that we live and love. And so that when, we just got new neighbors this last week, and my wife's met, well, she's like Brenda, right? She's met them, and they're not Christians, but let's say it was reversed, right? When they find out we're Christians, wouldn't it be great to be like, oh man, we got so lucky. We just moved next to a Christian family. They're the most incredible people. I don't even understand what they believe, but man, I'm sure thankful for them because they're the most loving, most incredible, most forgiving, most generous, most kind, most humble people. They're just the best, right? That we would be, that's the way that chatter would be about Christianity. That would really be my heart in a way that certainly makes them curious about, well, why? What makes them that way? Or for a church, that you could answer the question that everybody would be able to say, if let's say the church that I'm part of, Chase Oaks, if Chase Oaks disappeared, would people throw a party? Would they not notice? Or would they throw a wake? Mm-hmm. And I'd hope that they would throw a wake. If all of a sudden we disappear, they'd be like, the best part of our community just went away. Mm. That's the way we would live in culture collectively and individually.
Well, as we've said a couple times, we're kind of coming to the end of the conversations about this book. But Rebranding Christianity will live on. Rebrandingchristianity.org is going to live on. Things like that. This podcast is going to live on. Some of that and what it's going to look like, what it's going to sound like, we're still deciding. But tell me, just kind of what's your heart? What would you love to see a year from now, 2 years from now, as well after this book is released? What would you love to see as a linger?
Yeah, so I just hope that we can change the conversation. We talked about in this, kind of a persecution complex or whatever, where we feel like we're mistreated or misunderstood, is to get over that and just take responsibility the way Jesus said, and to just be way more proactive in living out the brand in a compelling way, not seeing ourselves as mistreated in culture, but responsible in this culture to do what Jesus said. And I would hope that, it wouldn't just be us. I mean, what we want to do in rebrandingchristianity.org, the reason we're talking about a movement, and I don't know if I've really shared this on the podcast, but the way I think of a movement of God is when different Christian tribes and people who aren't talking to each other, different parts of the country, different Christian groups, so they're not in the same orbit. But God is raising voices up, and all of those things, all these disparate voices who are saying a very similar thing. Mm-hmm. They're just not talking to each other. And that tells me God's boiling. He's bubbling something up. And I think we're in a time of correction. We've been through a time of mission drift away from the brand, away from the mission that we've been given. We're pretty far away from that. So there's this, God always does this. He'll bring a spirit of correction. He'll bring, and there'll be a corrective movement. And so I hope that we can be part of that we can be that we can respond to God's corrective spirit and word in movement that I believe He's starting. And so we want to feature different voices, different conversations, people who are thought leaders, people who are just practically actually doing what we're talking about, and so that we can not only change the conversation, but also bring correction to the American church to help us get back on brand.
Yeah. Yeah, there are beautiful expressions of Christianity in the same movement that you're talking about, kind of a correction from where we've been. And there are a lot of really interesting conversations to come in different cultural contexts, and it looks maybe different in a different area of the country in different ways, those types of things. But there's some neat things happening, and God is moving in His church, and He is bringing correction. And I feel, and I know, Jeff, because I've heard you speak about it, I really do feel that the future's bright, even though a lot of this podcast has been a little bit discouraging as we kind of look at where things are. But there is and we've kind of mentioned it, the first step in recovery is admitting there's a problem, and hopefully this can also be a place where we can do that openly and honestly, and then move forward together. So.
Yeah, the church isn't going anywhere. Jesus said, I'll build my church, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So the church is going to move on and all that. But any given expression of church may not, right? Yeah. And so what you want to do is whenever God's bringing about a time of correction and He's doing something new, is you can either resist it and double down on the old stuff that's not, that's off-brand, which a lot of people are going to do, or you can be open to the new thing God is doing, and that's what we want to do, and that's what we want to highlight, and I just hope we can dive right into all. It's going to. I mean, I think the future is going to be actually quite beautiful in the church, and I believe there will be a turning to God in our culture, because our culture is not doing well without God. And the only way they can do well and flourish is with Him. And we're the ones with that hope.
Yeah. Well, if you have been listening every week as these podcasts come out, we might take a few weeks off. Transition, Jeff and Mike, I know you guys are doing a lot of interviews with the book and things like that. But then when we jump back into a new series, it's going to be fresh conversations with fresh thinkers. And I'm just really, really looking forward to that. So join us as we continue in Rebranding Christianity.